10 days. That is what is left. 10 days between the world as it is right now, oil at $100 a barrel, bombs falling on Iran, missiles hitting the UAE, 1 million Lebanese on the roads, and a global economy straining under pressures it has not felt since 2008. And whatever comes next. 10 days in which Donald Trump and the Supreme Leader of Iran, a man who has barely been seen in public since he took power, will decide whether this war ends at a negotiating table or escalates into something that no government, no central bank, and no household budget on Earth is prepared for. Trump posted the extension on Truth Social just hours ago. He wrote that at Iranian government request, he was pausing the period of energy plant destruction by 10 days. He said talks were going very well. Iran's foreign ministry responded within hours. It called Trump's 15-point peace plan maximalist and unreasonable. It issued its own 5-point counteroffer. And it said something that every energy trader, every finance minister, and every ordinary person paying attention should read carefully. Iran said it will end this war when it decides to do so, and when its own conditions are met. This is Geo Polity, and this is Episode 8, the episode that every viewer of this channel has been building toward for 7 weeks. The episode where we take everything we have covered, the oil shock, the China calculation, the tariff crisis, the Lebanon invasion, the Ukraine abandonment, the Venezuela operation, the Kharg Island bombing, and bring it to the moment that matters most, the deal, or the apocalypse, and 10 days to find out which one we get. Welcome back to Geo Polity. If you have been with us from the beginning, you already know the full picture. You watched us explain in Episode 1 why the Strait of Hormuz controls the price of everything in your life. You watched us explain in Episode 4 why 1 million Lebanese civilians fled their homes in a single day. You watched us explain in Episode 7 why 7 words written by Donald Trump on a social media platform moved oil prices by $12 in a single trading session. If you are new here, welcome, and please go back and watch the full series from Episode 1, because what we are about to explain will be the most important thing we have ever said on this channel, and it will make complete sense only if you understand the 7 chapters that led to this moment. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, because after April the 6th, the world will look different from how it looks today, and you need to be here when we tell you what happened. Let us start with where we are. Day 27 of the Iran war, and the most important question in global geopolitics right now is whether the man who started it and the government trying to survive it can find enough common ground in the next 10 days to stop it. To understand the state of negotiations, we need to understand what each side actually wants, because the gap between those two things is where wars either end or explode. Trump's 15-point plan, as described by American officials and leaked to international media, contains demands that Iran has described as the terms of surrender rather than the terms of peace. Full cessation of Iranian nuclear enrichment. Permanent international inspections of all Iranian nuclear facilities with no restrictions and no advance notice. Complete dismantling of Iran's ballistic missile program. An end to all Iranian support for Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis in Yemen, and every other proxy force across the Middle East. Recognition of Israel's right to exist. Reparations to countries and companies damaged by Iranian military actions. And a formal renunciation of Iran's claim to control or restrict passage through the Strait of Hormuz. Read that list again, because it is not a negotiating position. It is a demand for Iran to become a fundamentally different country. A demand for Iran to dismantle the military and political architecture that its leadership has spent 40 years building. A demand that, if accepted, would remove every instrument of Iranian power and leave the country's government vulnerable to exactly the kind of regime change operation that Trump just executed in Venezuela. Iran's five-point counteroffer is, predictably, almost the mirror opposite. Iran demands immediate cessation of all U.S. and Israeli military operations, full withdrawal of American naval forces from the Persian Gulf within 90 days, international recognition of Iranian sovereignty over its nuclear program, subject to existing treaty obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, compensation to Iran for economic damage caused by sanctions and military strikes, and formal American acknowledgement that the strikes on Iranian territory constituted acts of aggression under international law. Those two positions are not close. They are not in the same negotiating universe. The gap between them is not a gap that diplomats bridge in 10 days through careful compromise language and late-night phone calls. And yet, the talks are apparently continuing. Pakistan is acting as intermediary, carrying messages between Washington and Tehran through diplomatic back channels. The Omani government, which has historically served as a quiet conduit between America and Iran, is reportedly active. Qatar, which mediates in almost every Middle Eastern conflict simultaneously, has offered its facilities for face-to-face talks if both sides can agree to attend. Why would both sides talk if the positions are this far apart? Because both sides have reasons to want a pause, even if they cannot agree on a permanent settlement. For Trump, a pause is politically valuable. Gasoline prices in the United States have been rising for 4 weeks. American voters who filled their tanks this week paid more than they have paid since 2022. The domestic economic pressure from the oil shock is beginning to register in polling data in ways that Trump's political team is watching very carefully. A ceasefire, even a temporary one, even one that resolves nothing permanently, brings oil prices down and gives Trump the political win of having ended the shooting. For Iran, a pause is militarily valuable. 27 days of sustained American and Israeli strikes have degraded Iran's air defense network significantly. Its radar systems are damaged, its missile production facilities have been targeted, its military command infrastructure has been disrupted. A 10-day pause is 10 days in which Iranian engineers can assess damage, reroute communications, move assets, and prepare for what comes after if the talks fail. A pause is not peace. It is a breath. That asymmetry, Trump needs a political win, Iran needs a military breath, is actually the foundation on which ceasefires are built in conflicts like this one. Both sides want to stop for different reasons. The question is whether their incompatible public positions can be papered over with enough diplomatic ambiguity to allow both leaders to tell their own audiences that they got what they needed. In the history of Middle Eastern diplomacy, that kind of constructive ambiguity has worked before. The 1973 ceasefire that ended the Yom Kippur War was built on exactly this principle. Both sides claimed victory. Both sides got something. Neither side got everything, and the shooting stopped. Now let us talk about the variable that makes this negotiation different from every previous one. The variable that nobody in the mainstream media is connecting clearly enough to the ceasefire talks. Israel. Israel is not at the negotiating table. Israel has not been consulted on the terms of Trump's 15-point plan in any meaningful way, according to Israeli officials who spoke to international media this week. And Israel has made its position clear through action rather than words. Israeli military sources confirmed to reporters this week that Israel is accelerating its targeting program in Iran over the next 48 hours. Specifically, it is attempting to destroy as many Iranian weapons manufacturing facilities as possible before a ceasefire is declared and the shooting stops. In other words, Israel is racing against its own allies' peace talks to do as much military damage as possible before those talks succeed. Think about what that means. The United States is trying to negotiate a ceasefire. Its closest military ally in the region is actively trying to prevent that ceasefire from taking effect too quickly by bombing as many targets as possible in the window before it begins. That is not allied coordination. That is a fracture. a fracture that runs directly between Washington and Jerusalem at the exact moment when unity of purpose is most needed. The Israeli calculation is straightforward and, from its own strategic perspective, entirely rational. Israel has spent decades arguing that Iran's nuclear program and its network of proxy forces represent an existential threat. The war that Trump started has given Israel an opportunity to degrade both of those threats that may not come again for a generation. Every day the war continues is a day more of Iran's military infrastructure is destroyed. Every factory building missiles, every facility enriching uranium, every command center coordinating Hezbollah, destroyed now means not rebuilt for years. A ceasefire on April the 6th freezes the damage at whatever level it has reached by April the 6th. From Israel's perspective, every hour before that deadline is precious. From Trump's perspective, Israel's accelerated bombing campaign is a complication. Every additional Israeli strike on Iranian territory between now and April the 6th is a new provocation that Iran's negotiators must respond to publicly. Every new strike makes it harder for Iranian officials to sell any agreement to their own population as anything other than capitulation. And capitulation is the one thing that no Iranian government can survive politically. This is the knife edge on which the next 10 days balance. Trump trying to close a deal, Iran trying to buy time and save face, Israel trying to bomb as much as possible before the window closes, and the world's oil supply, the global economy, and the daily lives of billions of people hanging in the space between those three competing agendas. Now let us introduce the figure who may be the most important unknown in this entire crisis, the man whose voice has barely been heard, but whose decisions will determine everything. Ayatollah Mujtaba Khamenei, the new Supreme Leader of Iran. When his father, Ali Khamenei, was killed in the American and Israeli strikes in late February, Mujtaba was elevated to the supreme leadership in a process that was rushed, disputed within Iranian political circles, and deeply opaque to the outside world. He is younger than his father was when he took power. He is less experienced in the machinery of Iranian statecraft, and according to intelligence assessments from multiple Western agencies, his actual decision-making authority relative to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is unclear. That last point is critical. The IRGC, Iran's ideological military force, distinct from the regular Iranian army and answerable directly to the supreme leader, has its own institutional interests in this conflict. Its commanders have built careers, budgets, and power bases around the doctrine of resistance against America and Israel. A ceasefire that requires Iran to dismantle its proxy network is not just a political concession for them. It is an existential threat to their institutional power. If Mujtaba Khamenei is strong enough to override IRGC objections and accept a deal, the talks have a chance. If he is not, if the IRGC effectively has veto power over any agreement, then the 5-point counteroffer is not a negotiating position. It is a delay tactic while Iran's military and intelligence services recover from the damage of the past 27 days and prepare for the next phase of the conflict. Nobody in Washington, London, Riyadh, or Jerusalem knows with certainty which of those two situations is true. That uncertainty is the most dangerous element of the next 10 days. Let us now talk about the two futures, because this is the moment where the analysis becomes most personal for every person watching this video. Future 1 is a ceasefire deal, not a comprehensive peace agreement, that is years away at minimum, but a cessation of hostilities, a framework document that both sides can call a victory in their own language to their own audiences. American forces pull back from their most aggressive operational posture. Iran agrees to a temporary suspension of uranium enrichment above civilian levels. The Strait of Hormuz reopens to commercial traffic. Israel accepts the ceasefire under American pressure, however grudgingly. If this happens, oil prices fall. Not back to where they were before the war began. The risk premium built into every barrel will take months to fully dissipate. But from $110 toward $80 or $85 within weeks. UK petrol prices begin to fall. American gasoline starts coming back down from its current levels. European energy futures ease. The global recession that Oxford Economics was modeling as the base case scenario if oil stays above $140 gets pushed back, perhaps indefinitely. The people who have been watching their energy bills, their petrol receipts, and their grocery totals rise for 4 weeks get a reprieve. Not a complete reversal, not a refund, but a direction of travel that moves toward relief rather than further pain. That is Future 1. Future 2 begins on April the 7th. Trump's deadline passes. No deal has been reached. The 15 points and the 5 points remain irreconcilable. Trump faces a choice between accepting that he could not close the deal, a political humiliation for a man whose identity is built on deal-making, and following through on the 7 words he wrote on Truth Social 3 weeks ago. It may not stay that way. If Trump orders the strike on Kharg Island's oil terminals, the sequence of events that follows has been modeled, wargamed, and analyzed by every serious energy economist and military strategist on Earth. We covered it in detail in episode 7, but the headline numbers bear repeating now because they are not abstract. They are the price of your life. Oil reaches between $180 and $220 per barrel within days. UK petrol hits 200 pence per litre, a price that has never existed in British history. American gasoline hits $6 to $7 per gallon nationally. Iran retaliates against Gulf infrastructure. Saudi Arabia's Abqaiq facility is struck. 8 to 10% of global daily oil supply is removed from the market simultaneously. A global recession begins. The worst since 2008. Possibly worse than 2008. Food prices rise 30% because fertilizer and transport run on energy. Airlines ground routes or triple ticket prices. Heating bills double heading into the Northern Hemisphere summer, and will still be double when winter arrives. Businesses that survived the pandemic survived the post-Ukraine energy shock and are already stretched thin by 4 weeks of elevated oil prices begin to fail. And the war does not end. Because bombing the oil terminals does not make Iran surrender. It makes Iran fight harder with less to lose. The IRGC, which has been arguing for escalation against the moderates arguing for negotiation, gets exactly the justification it needs to take full control of Iranian decision-making and commit the country to a war of national survival with no exit. That is Future 2. 10 days, 2 futures, and the decision resting with people whose calculations we can analyze, but whose choices we cannot predict. Now let us connect this to everything we have told you over the past 7 episodes. Because the reason this moment is so consequential is precisely because it sits at the intersection of every other crisis we have covered. China is watching this deadline. Xi Jinping's military planning window for Taiwan runs through 2027. A world in which America is drawn into a prolonged, escalating war in the Persian Gulf with no ceasefire, with oil at $200, with European allies alarmed and partially estranged, with the U.S. Navy stretched across multiple theaters, that is a world in which the Taiwan window opens wider than it has ever been. A deal that ends the Iran war by April the 6th closes that window significantly. Future 2 opens it to a width that genuinely frightens American Pacific commanders. Russia's calculation over Ukraine is directly tied to this deadline. Every day of Iranian war at oil above $100 is a day that European economies supporting Ukraine face additional fiscal pressure. Germany, France, and the UK are all managing the dual burden of elevated energy costs and increased defense spending simultaneously. A prolonged energy shock that pushes European economies toward recession weakens the political will for sustained Ukraine support. Putin is not hoping for a ceasefire on April the 6th. He is hoping for future 2. The Lebanon crisis that we covered in episode 4 has a direct ceasefire connection. American negotiators have privately linked progress on Iran to the possibility of renewed pressure on Israel to accept a Lebanese ceasefire. The two negotiations are intertwined. If the Iran deal happens, Lebanon gets a ceasefire too. If the Iran deal fails, Lebanon's war has no diplomatic ceiling. And Venezuela, the operation we covered in episode 6, sits in the background of this deadline in a way that rarely gets mentioned. Trump used executive power in Venezuela without congressional authorization and without legal constraint. If he strikes Kharg Island's oil terminals and triggers a global recession, the political and legal challenges to his authority that follow will be the most severe of his presidency. The Supreme Court that he defied over tariffs will face pressure to rule on the legality of executive war-making at a scale that the American constitutional system has not confronted since Vietnam. Everything is connected. Everything leads to April the 6th. Everything depends on what happens in the next 10 days. Let us now talk about what you can do. Not as a geopolitical actor, you are not one, but as a person navigating a world that is genuinely uncertain in ways that have direct practical implications for your daily life. If you are in the United Kingdom, the most important thing you can do in the next 10 days is understand that the energy price trajectory you are living through is not permanent, regardless of which future unfolds. If Future 1 happens, prices begin to ease by May. If Future 2 happens, prices get significantly worse before any relief arrives. Planning your household finances around that range of outcomes, not assuming either extreme but understanding both are real, is more valuable than any single piece of financial advice. If you are in the United States, you are living through a moment where the domestic political cost of foreign policy decisions is becoming visible in a way that is unusually direct. Gasoline prices are a daily referendum on the war. Watch what happens to those prices in the week after April the 6th. They will tell you, more clearly than any press conference or Truth Social post, what the actual outcome of the deadline was. If you are in the Gulf region, in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, in Kuwait, you are living on the front line of Future 2 in a way that no other population on Earth is. The missiles that hit Fujairah port were a message. A strike on Abqaiq would not be a message. It would be a catastrophe. Your governments are working every back channel available to them to prevent that outcome. Support those efforts in whatever way your circumstances allow. If you are anywhere in the developing world, in South Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, you are the population most vulnerable to the difference between Future 1 and Future 2. $200 oil does not mean expensive petrol for you. It means food you cannot afford. It means fertilizer your farmers cannot buy. It means a growing season that fails in a way that takes years to recover from. The stakes of the next 10 days are higher for your communities than for almost any other on Earth. And if you are watching from China, from Russia, from any country whose government has an interest in this crisis going one way rather than another, understand that the analysts, the historians, and the ordinary people of the world are watching what your governments do in the next 10 days too. The messages sent to Pakistan as intermediary, the diplomatic signals coming through Oman and Qatar, the back-channel conversations happening in Geneva and Vienna and Muscat, all of it matters. All of it is part of the machinery that will produce either a ceasefire or a catastrophe. This is the moment. After 7 weeks of episodes, after 7 connected crises, after one of the most comprehensive attempts to explain a global inflection point that this channel has ever attempted, this is the moment where the story either turns or breaks. Geo Polity will be here on April the 6th. We will be here on April the 7th. We will cover what happens with the same clarity, the same connection of dots, and the same commitment to telling you not just what happened, but why it happened, and what it means for your life. If this series has been valuable to you, if these 8 episodes have given you something that the mainstream news could not, a map instead of a headline, a picture instead of a fragment, please like this video right now. 8 episodes in, your engagement is what keeps this analysis reaching the people who need it most. Subscribe to Geo Polity if you are not already here. Turn on the notification bell. Because after April the 6th, everything changes. And you need to be here for episode 9. Share this video. Share the whole series. There are people in your life right now who are confused and frightened by a world that feels like it is accelerating towards something they cannot name. Give them the name. Give them the map. Give them 8 episodes of Geo Polity and let them understand what is actually happening. And leave a comment right now. Tell us which future you think we are heading toward. Do you think Trump and Iran will find enough common ground in 10 days to stop this war? Or do you think April the 7th brings the strike on the oil terminals and everything that follows? Tell us where in the world you are watching from. Tell us how these 8 weeks have changed how you see the news. We read everything, every comment, every perspective, and your answers shape episode 9. 10 days. This is Geo Polity. Stay informed, stay analytical, and we will see you on the other side of the deadline.